Hello, everybody. As Troy said, my name is Chris Rice. I fulfill two roles here at Qlik. I am a principal technical support engineer as well as a designated support engineer for some of our larger customers. My main focus lately has been on making things run better for my customers. The majority of my direct customers have gone past the stage of getting the product to work well in their system, and now they're just focused on improving those processes, training individuals, getting it so that they don't have to come to us at support if they don't need to. I've been here for about 6 years now, and I've enjoyed every minute of it. Today, we will be talking about how to, um, there we go, I can get the slide to advance. We're going to be talking about how to troubleshoot your ClickSense engine service. We're going to go over what the ClickSense Enterprise Engine Service is, how it works, some common errors, and then I'll do a demo for you. And at the end, we'll have some links for further reading, which we'll also put in the notes that will accompany this presentation. First, what is the ClickSense Enterprise Engine Service? I've got a nice quote for you there from our help site. By the way, if you haven't been to help.qlik.com, I highly recommend it. There's a lot of great information on there. But to give you a foundation of knowledge, think of the engine as the process that you're going to be interacting with anytime you want to manipulate data in your system. So whether that's reloading the data, making a selection, doing any of the caching that's necessary as we store stuff into memory, all of that takes place inside of the engine. You've got a nice diagram here at the bottom for you that says we take your data, we put it through our engine, we make pretty graphs on your screen. That is the most basic level of information here. Then how does it work? That's more complicated, and it can get very complicated than what we can really cover in this presentation today. But to simplify it, we take your data and then we create an index, much like the index that's in a book that you read. It's an easy way to look up the information that's in the book. We store that index into memory so that we can query that in a much faster way. If we take this book analogy one step further, say you have a very large book like the O section of the encyclopedia, you may not know everything about ostriches, but if somebody wants to know about ostriches, you can easily tell them which page that information is on. Much like with the ClickSense engine, because everything is indexed, we can quickly go to that portion of your data to read and analyze it. Of course, in order to do that, we need to use memory and CPU on the server where ClickSense is being hosted. And this is where a lot of people may think that they're running into errors. What I'm showing you now is a graph of a probable load of memory on your system. This top line here where it says working set low, that by the way is Qlik view terminology with ClickSense. It's going to be min memory usage, and then for working set high it's going to be max memory usage. This is configurable in your system. It's automatically set to, I think, 70% for the min memory usage in your system. And QlikView will try to use all of that. And that's what trips a lot of people up, is they see this memory usage growing and growing and staying level at that min memory usage line and thinking, maybe there's a data leak or something like that, but no, we do that on purpose because we want to save all of this cached information. To kind of walk you through the diagram, as a user loads a document in the hub, you will see that information be stored into memory. The user session as well is stored into memory, and any selection or any calculation that is done on that document is stored into memory, and that usually takes up the vast majority of the memory for the system. And then as the session is over and times out, that memory goes down. If all sessions on a particular document time out, that memory portion goes down. But you see this cached selections and stuff like that, the cached result set stays the same. That's because we expect users to come back in later on the same document and do the same calculations. Those are what take time, and therefore we want to save you that time by keeping that information in memory. Now that may go away if the document is reloaded or if we run up against this upper boundary here and need to make room for more things. So you may want to look at how this looks in your environment. If you have documents, the gray portion, taking up the majority of your memory, you don't have a lot of room for these cache results set. Or your system may not be operating as efficiently as it could be. You will see the cast result set going up and down on this working set low line. We try to remove stuff from cache as necessary to keep it on the low, but we will go up to the high and then start forcefully purging things as needed to from there. That is the memory side of things. But for the CPU side of things, you would expect things to be a little bit different. It may be kind of hard to see in the pictures here, but in a good CPU setup, I would expect to see the CPU spike up from time to time and use all of the CPU, but come back down after a bit. And do that over and over again as it is doing its calculations. What I would not expect to see in a properly running system is a more consistently high CPU with the spikes going back down to a low set. That means that your CPU is overtaxed, and that could be because you're trying to push through too much at once. It could be because your algorithms are not properly written. There could be a large number of things. At this point, it would be a good idea to go ahead and get someone like our consulting team involved or a partner to understand what it is you're trying to accomplish in your system and make sure you have the right resources to do that. As a matter of fact, it would be a good idea to get those people involved from the very beginning so you don't have to run into a situation and then resolve it afterwards. So that's a very basic overview of what the engine is, what it does, what that's supposed to look like on the server itself. What happens when we run into errors? So there are several different errors that you could run into with the engine, and you would see that either in the hub from your users reporting things or in the QMC itself. These are generally what those errors look like, what a few of the verbiages of the errors are. You can 9 times out of 10 take the text from that error, search in our knowledge base, and you will find the steps to take care of that error. If you want a more step-by-step way of making sure that everything is working properly, then follow along because next we're going to do a little demo. I've got an environment here that's running on a single node Qlik Sense installation. And I know that I'm having an issue with my Qlik Sense engine because if I try to go and open the ops monitor here, I'm going to get an error. It says there's no Qlik Sense engine available. And if I go to the hub from there, it will open up the hub, but you can see that there's actually nothing to see here. I can go to any of my streams, and I normally have at least a couple of apps, but nothing is there currently. So the first step that we want to take in this situation is to go to the QMC. So thankfully, I have a little link saved here. And once I go into the QMC and I scroll down to the engine section, I see there is a warning there. I've got, like as I said, a one-node system. The status for this engine, it says stopped. Now if I take a look, it says that this engine has been stopped for about half an hour? No, longer than that. It's been stopped for a bit. Anyway, there it goes, for 2 minutes, if I can read the time. So, since I know that the management service is saying that the engine is stopped, then I can move over to the services, step 2, check those to see what's going on there. And then I can see, sure enough, the status is not running. So I'm going to go ahead and start that. And once that starts, you give it a minute or so, and it will start communicating with the management console again. That communication with the management console will allow it to start doing its job. So now we can see this is already set back to running, and then I should be able to go back into the hub and see my documents. Yep, there's that one. I want to look at some monitoring apps. The apps monitor was what I was opening to begin with. And opening that should allow me to view my app. It's a very quick two-step, get the thing running. If that doesn't fix your issue, though, there are several more steps that we can take. The next step that I would take is to check that all of the ports that are required for QlikSense to run are running. If you've been to our help site, you may see that we have listed all of the ports that QlikSense needs to run. Now, you can use something like the QlikSense log collector to check that all the ports in your machine to see if these are running, or you can check them ad hoc if you wish. I like to use PowerShell here. You have to run it as administrator. It has a function called test net connection. Test-net connection. Then you supply a server name. In this case, I'm using localhost. And then you supply it a port. Now I'm going to check port 4747, which the engine uses to connect to the repo. So that's going to try to reach out to that machine on that port and give you the response that was received. In this case, we can see that the TCP test did succeed. That value equals true. You could do this for any number of things, or like I said, you can just use the QlikSense log collector, run that, make sure it prints out the list of ports that you have open, then use the case cockpit to open up the log collector file and do a comparison. If all of the ports are open, you can then move on to the system requirements. Also in the help site, the system requirements will list everything such as the version of Windows you can run this on, amount of memory, all sorts of stuff like that. Lots of good information in here. Be sure to check it and make sure it's accurate. One of those pieces of information is the WebSocket, which we'll hit on in a few steps, but pay specific attention to the memory and disk space, especially if you're storing the files that you plan on accessing in this same server. You want to make sure that you've got enough disk space there. Then you've got to also make sure in the management console that you have the engine set up properly. So even if it's running, you still have to do some additional setup in the virtual proxy space to make sure that it is connected to a proxy so that you're not just trying to connect to a proxy that doesn't have an engine. In this case, I'm using the central proxy. If I open that up and go over to the load balancing section, you can see that I do have an engine here. If you're missing this in your load balancing section, you'll want to set that up. Additionally, one other thing to always make sure of in the advanced section that you've got the host whitelist configured. So whatever URL you're putting up here to reach the hub, you'll want to make sure that the root of that URL is also in your host whitelist so that you're passing that information through. Okay, then on to step 4 is checking the logs. Now, we've done a whole other video on how to gather and view the logs in your ClickSense system. And we'll put the link to that video and the notes for that video in the notes for this presentation. But I'm going to go over just real quickly like I just did. I saw an error in my system. If I want to very quickly see what has caused that error, at least what the full error message is in my system, I can use something like Notepad++, which has a search feature that you can search over an entire directory. So here I have specified the active log directory for this system, and I can say that happened around 5:36, I believe it was. We're just going to look at the 5:30 time frame. So I've got the date in here properly. Time, we're going to move over to 053 and leave the last character off because I want anything in that 5:30 time frame. And I'm going to look for any number of characters, that's what the dot star is, in between that timestamp and the word warn, which is what ClickSense uses for warning. You can also put error here if it's an error that you're looking for. You'll want to make sure that regular expression is selected down at the bottom. That's what this dot star is a regular expression. Click Find All. It will search through all of your logs to find anything that has that timestamp with warn after it. And you can see we've got quite a few in here. So you can, when you've got quite a few things, it breaks it down by the specific log. You can start to get more and more specific. So I can say 532, for example, in order to get fewer errors to comb through. But that's something that I always like to use if I'm currently experiencing the issue so that I can then take the error message itself, search for it in our knowledge base, quickly find the answer I'm looking for. Also covered in that video is how to use the ClickSense log collector and Qlik cockpit, which are both included with your Sense installation to do this same type of thing, but in a more holistic way to get a larger view of the environment instead of focusing on this specific error. On to the promised WebSocket session. So ClickSense uses WebSockets to communicate between the engine and the repository so that we don't have to constantly refresh the page. If you select an element, it uses the WebSocket to communicate back and forth to go, okay, this selection means that now I should display this graph or this line on the graph this way instead of the way it was happening before. But a lot of companies or a lot of load balancing products will either block WebSockets by default or make it so that you have to configure the product in question in order to use WebSockets the way that we use them. An easy way to check if WebSockets are enabled in your system is to use a plugin that we've developed, one of our guys in R&D has developed. The information's out there on GitHub. We'll put the links down below. But what that GitHub repository does is it allows you to create a content library item for this WebSocket connectivity tester. That will give you a URL, which you can then place in your browser after the host name. So in this case, I'm placing it after the host name here, replacing the rest of this information with what I copied from down here. That should open up another page which checks for 4 different connections on my WebSockets. If any of these turn red, then you can search for the item that's in red on our knowledge base, figure out what to do from there. Those are the 5 biggest things that we see most of our customers running into when it comes to ClickSense engine problems. Now, there are other things that customers can run into, and when those things happen, we've got several articles online which explain, based on the error message, what you should be doing. The best way to go about troubleshooting any of this, of course, is to follow the steps as I've listed here. Check the QMC, make sure services are running down the list until you've gotten to this check other KB articles and you can't find any more information, then please do log a case. That's what we're here for. We'll help you as much as we can. We'll get the problem solved for you one way or another. Yep, that's it for me. We've got all these links here and several more down below for you to check out. Please ask me some questions.
Okay, everyone, please submit your questions through the Q&A panel on the left side of your console.
Yeah, so we've got one customer asking, is there a way to see what portion of memory is used per document, session, and cache? And yes, actually, there have been some new features introduced into both ClickSense and ClickView lately. With ClickSense, I think it starts with the February 2018 version. With ClickView, it starts with the September 2018 version, I believe, 12.30 for ClickView. And that's a feature called Telemetry. And what telemetry does is it's disabled by default, but when you enable it, it creates a new log file which logs every interaction that your end users are doing on the system in a this click caused this much CPU to be spent over this amount of time, this much memory to be used over this amount of time, as well as several other in-depth metrics. So you can see down to the user, app, and object what's happening as you click around. Now, that sounds intense because it is. You will create a large amount of logging by doing this. So we really don't recommend that you run it in a production system unless you're doing it for a very short amount of time for a very specific purpose. What this is best used for is in tests or some other pre-prod type of environment so that you can really get a hold of what's happening in your system. That information is on our help site and in our articles. We also have a dashboard that you can use to visualize those logs. Of course, we're a visualization company. That is on GitHub. The links for all of that will be in the video description and everything once we post it later on. We have another customer asking, do you have an application to analyze the ClickSense log collector logs? Yes, that is the cockpit that I was speaking of earlier. Both the ClickSense log collector and the Qlik cockpit come pre-bundled with your version of ClickSense. There may be newer versions out there. You can always check our knowledge base on the how to get ClickSense logs article for newer versions of both of these products. But essentially, if you go into C program files, ClickSense tools, they're going to be right there. The log collector, of course, collects everything into a zip file. You then drag and drop that zip file on top of the cockpit, which is a visualization tool for looking at all of that stuff. As I said earlier, we did a entire other video on this, which we will link below as well. We had a customer asking, do other customers have issues with ports not releasing? We have to keep rebooting our servers, but that's a workaround. If you could provide a little bit more detail here as to what you're asking. Ports releasing from what specifically? Because I don't think I can answer that as it is stated. Customer asking, how do we identify whether QlikSense is releasing memory when the app timeout occurs? I mentioned telemetry earlier. That could be a good tool for proving that this process works. But there are several things which can prevent the memory being released. You could always have preload enabled on documents. I know at least you can do that in Qlik View. I'm pretty sure you can do that in QlikSense. And then as long as there's any activity whatsoever, that document is going to stay in memory and be active in memory. So it's only after the last session is closed that the app timeout starts to become relevant. So just keep that in mind when you're trying to check those things. We have a customer asking, can you please show again the route to find the web URL to test the sense URL issue? So I believe you're talking about the Websocket thing. Let me share my screen again. Where's that button again, Troy?
Sorry, that's down on the bottom right. Screen share.
Right. Screen share, there we go, thank you. And I am going to share the screen. All right, so if I go into the management console, nope, I do not need to restore those pages, thank you. So if we go into content libraries, and you'll have to create this library after you download the information from GitHub, and then go into the contents of that, and then the URL path is right here. You'll take that entire URL and copy it after the server name here, and then it'll do that for you. All right, so I need to move this over. Oop. So we have a customer asking, when does memory allocated by cache result sets return to 0 or close to 0 when you restart the service? Or restart the service in one of many different ways, but that information stays there. We like to hold that information in memory so that way we can more quickly recall it later. Customer asking, can you talk again about the engine being attached to the virtual proxy? What does this mean? What are we confirming? So essentially, when you create a virtual proxy in your QlikSense system, it does not by default have an engine attached to it. So you have to make that attachment in order to have an engine to work with. Let me find one more question for you guys. Here's a good one. Are there good strategies in troubleshooting outages or QlikSense engine slowness by looking in the operation monitor? Yes, the operation monitor has a ton of great graphs and statistics around your entire installation of QlikSense. The thing you need to keep in mind about the operations monitor is that it reads logs from the archive log folder. You may not know, but in each of your nodes in Qlik sense, you're going to have an active log folder, and then you have a shared archive log folder for all of those logs. But to move a log from the active log folder over to the archive log folder, one of three things has to happen. You need to 24 hours need to expire, so it needs to go into the next day. You need to restart a service, or that log, it needs to get over, I think it's 10 megabytes, or maybe it's just 1 megabyte in size. Um, that last one should hardly ever happen. The first one happens every day, and then yeah, you get it for the second one. It only happens when you tell it to happen, hopefully. But that means that if you're actively experiencing an issue and you haven't done one of those three things, then you're not going to see the data for that issue in the ops monitor. So you can always just do a restart of everything, and that should hopefully accomplish two different things. A, hopefully it just fixes your issue, and then B, you are able to, after you do a reload on the ops monitor, see that data in the ops monitor to try to narrow down what's happened. Now, as far as specific strategies in the ops monitor for narrowing down things, that's going to change based upon the issue that you're seeing. But I do like the idea of having a similar type session as this, where we simply walk through the ops monitor and license monitor and teach you how to use it in a better way. That's a great idea.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you. It was really enjoyable.
Thank you, everyone. We hope you enjoyed this session. And thank you to Chris for presenting. We always appreciate getting experts like Chris to share with us. Here's our legal disclaimer. And thank you once again. Have a great rest of your day.